Good afternoon, Veritas scientists. It is Wednesday, April 15th, 2020. Please watch yesterday's video about how coal was formed. Make sure that you understand this model. Please pause it and go back to yesterday's video if you haven't watched that one yet, because this won't make much sense if you haven't watched that. All right, so this was the question I left you yesterday. We're going to start moving into something called the carbon cycle, which we'll talk about at the end of this video and more about tomorrow. Okay, but this question says, based on what you learned about coal and mountaintop removal in yesterday's video, what effects does it have on the surrounding ecosystem? Give at least 2 negative effects in your response. So we got to give 2 negative effects of how coal and mountaintop removal, what negative effects they have on the surrounding ecosystem. Okay, so we learned about how coal is formed in strips, and there was a mountain here, and the companies that needed to get the coal out, it's much less expensive for them to just blow the top of the mountain off, kaboom, and then it is no longer there. They dig out the coal, and then they move on to the next mountain and do the same thing, and move on to the next mountain, do the same thing, and they continue doing that over and over again. So this happens a lot down in the Appalachian Mountains, specifically in the state of West Virginia. Okay, so this is happening in the United States, and we're going to talk more about that in just a little bit. Okay, so basically these mountaintops are gone, right? They dig the coal out. So we want to know, how does that affect the surrounding ecosystem? How does that affect the system of different plants and animals that all kind of work together in order to survive? All right, so here's my answer to that question. So bear with me while I read this. This is probably some new information for you. So go back or slow my voice down if it's going a little too quickly. So here's a question from yesterday. It says, 2 negative effects that coal and mountaintop removal have on the surrounding ecosystem are, and here's my 2 answers, air pollution and loss of habitat for many living things. People use coal because it's made up of mostly carbon and therefore easily lights on fire to use as fuel. But burning carbon releases a lot of carbon dioxide, or CO2, into the atmosphere. Too much CO2 in the atmosphere is contributing to global warming and is polluting the air we breathe. The second negative effect is the loss of habitat for many living things due to mountaintop removal. When the top of a mountain is removed, all of the plants, trees, and animals need to find another place to live or they won't survive. For example, the squirrel that used to live in a tree on a mountaintop needs to find a safe new home or it will be eaten by a predator, such as a hawk. Also, the trees that are destroyed during mountaintop removal will no longer be producing oxygen for us to breathe, adding to the air pollution that I discussed earlier. These are just 2 of the many negative effects that coal and mountaintop removal have on the surrounding ecosystem. Okay, so those are 2 effects. Air pollution and loss of habitat for many living things. There are many others, so I want to see what your answers are to those, and I will give you feedback to see if those are good, well, they're bad effects, but if those are accurate negative effects that coal and mountaintop removal have on the surrounding ecosystem. All right, yesterday I ran out of time on my video, so I'm trying to move a little bit quickly through this, so just slow down and go back if I'm talking too fast. Okay, here are some additional facts about coal. There are 4 types of coal, depending on how much carbon is in the coal, and therefore how old it is. So the older the coal is, the more carbon it's going to have in it. So there are 4 different types of coal. Basically, the different types have different amounts of carbon in it, and the older it is, it has more carbon. Okay, so 25%, the second fact here, or 1/4 of the world's coal supply is in the United States. Due to how North America was formed millions of years ago, it was very, very swampy, so that led to all this coal being produced here. But that's very interesting that 1/4 of the whole world's supply of coal is in the United States. I thought that was very interesting. And the last one, coal is mostly made up of carbon because over millions of years, the dead swamp plants experienced lots of ground heat and pressure, which removed the oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen from those plants, leaving mostly carbon. Okay, so those plants died. They had oxygen in them, they had hydrogen in them, they had nitrogen and carbon all in the plants, right? The plants died, the heat from the ground, the pressure from the ground and the atmosphere, and everything pushing down on those dead plants, right? It got rid of or removed all the oxygen, all the hydrogen, and all the nitrogen over those millions of years, ended up getting removed from it from the heat and pressure, and what was left was carbon. So that's what was left, and that is what turned into the coal that we have. Okay, so here is your question I'd like you to answer for tonight. It says, as we learned, coal is made up mostly of carbon. When coal is burned, carbon dioxide, or CO2, is released into the atmosphere. What do you predict happens to the carbon dioxide, CO2, that's released into the atmosphere? And it says, hint, tomorrow's lesson is about the carbon cycle. So we're going to learn about how there is a cycle that carbon goes through on our planet. So I want you to think about that as you try to predict what happens to the carbon dioxide that's released into the atmosphere. Okay, we burn coal, carbon is released into the atmosphere. We said that that's not good for our planet, and I want you to think about what then happens to that carbon. Okay, so the answer I'm not looking for, I just want to be clear, the answer I'm not looking for is that it actually, and this is true, it does go up into the air and it puts holes in the atmosphere, right? Because there's too much CO2. It's not like a natural amount of CO2 because we're burning this coal, and it actually causes an issue with global warming because part of the atmosphere is actually getting eaten up by the CO2 because there's so much of it that it's actually deteriorating our atmosphere. And then there are more harmful rays that are coming down that are getting through our atmosphere that are coming from the sun, right? Because there's not as much protection from our atmosphere because part of it is being burned away, all right? So that's not the answer I'm looking for, okay? That is an accurate answer, but I just want to be clear that that's not really what I'm thinking about because we're moving into what's called the carbon cycle. So I want you to think, what do you predict happens to the carbon dioxide that's released into the atmosphere? Where do you think it goes next? All right, and that's it. Pretty quick lesson today. Hope everybody enjoys. I want to see your answers for this problem, for this question, and we'll talk more about the carbon cycle tomorrow. All right, have a great day.